to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. On today's show, we're going to talk about something I've been watching grow for a long time now, both across social media and in other kink spaces. There's a sharp rise in hostility, and it's the kind that pushes people past disagreement and straight into personal attacks. I'm seeing more posts that carry an all or nothing tone, more people treating anger as a badge, and not a not a lot of room for calm or even conversation. This episode is not about politics. Today, this is about behavior. It's about how people are speaking to each other, how quick we are to escalate, and how that shift is starting to affect the kink community. Now, before I get into all of this, as I always do, I want to thank all of my longtime listeners and welcome those who are joining me for the first time. A lot of you out of Belgium, a couple out of Sweden. Thank you for your support. I appreciate it. Argentina, again, glad your little community is growing down there. Anything I can do to help, please let me know. And Moscow, out of all places, I had no idea. I'd love to learn one day more about what your community looks like there. Curious about kink spaces all over the world, not just in one culture or another. So thank you all. If you are enjoying these discussions, please remember to like, subscribe, follow the show if you're on Spotify, using the apps. Rate the show 5 stars. This helps more people find it, right? If you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, right? Follow the show there. Help it grow on YouTube as well. Now, you're going to also find a donation link in the description of the show for anyone who wants to support the work and keep these episodes going. Any amount, big or small, is always helpful. All right. Now, let's set the stage for today's topic, because you're going to notice this is not something I get into. I don't really like to get into politics, and I'm not. This isn't going to be about politics today. I am repeating this again because I know people are going to think, oh, Chris is getting political. I'm not. I'm going to talk about behavior. Kink communities have always been built on conversation and curiosity and desire, and definitely a certain level of maturity. Now, people come here to explore, to learn, to connect to that internal part of themselves, to that erotic layer. But lately, it feels like we're losing that. And instead of talking, people are shouting. And instead of asking questions, they're making declarations. And instead of slowing down, they're trying to, maybe understand the other side. They jump straight in with hostility. And when that becomes normal, the entire space changes. So today, I'm going to look at why this is happening, what emotional forces sit behind it, and how this shift is hurting connection and trust in the community itself. This is not about which views people hold. It's about how those views are delivered and how anger has become the first move and how that makes it harder for the community to function. And by the end of this episode, I want you to have a clearer picture of the behavior we're seeing and why naming it matters. So let's get into it. First, I want to talk about emotional overload and the need for certainty. Now, when people talk about how angry the world feels right now, they often frame it like it's just a political issue. But underneath all of that, there's something much more human going on. People are overwhelmed. They're stretched thin. They're living on budgets, right? They have fears they don't know how to name, and they're carrying a level of emotional noise that most of us weren't even built for. Now, in that kind of environment, certainty feels like relief, and it gives people a place to plant their feet, sort of, right? So when someone feels lost or stressed or powerless, strong positions feel like protection. They stop being ideas and start becoming shields. And that's when you see people latch on to absolute opinions, not because they're grounded in fact, but because the firmness calms something inside of them. This is why so many posts online have had that hard, rigid tone. It's not confidence, it's overwhelm. It's a way of saying, I need something in my life to feel solid, even if it's the anger I'm holding on to. And when people lack inner stability, they try to borrow it from their reactions. Rage, in this sense, can feel really powerful. So, for a few seconds, it makes someone feel clear and strong and in control. But think about how many people talk tough online, but they shrink in real situations. It's not because they're dishonest, it's because online anger gives them a temporary sense of identity they don't have anywhere else. And it is a quick, artificial version of feeling grounded. And here's the part that many people don't realize: the brain loves patterns. Now, if something gives even a moment of relief, the brain learns to repeat it. So when anger works as a short term coping strategy, people go back to it. They rely on it, even when they know it's hurting the community. And over time, the anger becomes a habit. They're not even trying to solve anything anymore. They're chasing a feeling that tells them, I'm not powerless. Most of what we're seeing online is not thoughtful conviction, it's emotional survival. So when someone makes an extreme statement, they're often trying to push back their own anxiety. The louder they get, the smaller they feel inside. And the community ends up dealing with the fallout of that inner conflict. And truly, you can see this clearly in kink spaces because people come here already holding complex emotions. They may feel misunderstood in their daily lives. They may use kink to feel seen or exposed, grounded, or, sometimes even stable. When those same people are overwhelmed by the outside world, the pressure spills over. Now, I'm not excusing behavior. What I am doing here is I'm attempting to explain some of it, right? So the community has now become the place where they discharge this frustration. The post becomes intense because the person behind the post feels intense. And this is why we see people jump past discussion and straight into accusations or even ultimatums. They don't have the emotional bandwidth to stay in the middle because the middle feels uncertain. It requires patience. It requires listening, right? It requires critical thinking. And many people don't have the tools to sit with that discomfort. So they reach for the quickest, hardest stance they can find. It feels safer, it feels cleaner, but it's not clarity. It's not insight. It's just self protection wearing the mask of conviction. When we understand that, we can look at what's happening online without getting pulled into the noise. We can see the emotional overload behind the sharp edges. And we can start to talk about the real issue, which is how fear pushes people into extremes and how those extremes reshape the spaces we care about. And this is going to lead me into this next segment here, which is identity signaling instead of real conversations. Now, once people are on overload and they're uncertain, the next thing they look for is belonging. And human beings have always done this. When life feels unstable, we look for a group that feels steady. It grounds us. We want to feel part of something larger than ourselves. We want to feel seen. And in healthy communities, that shows up as shared curiosity, shared values, or even shared experiences. But when people are running hot, when they feel overwhelmed or powerless, that search for belonging starts to take on a very different shape. And instead of genuine connection, people start using loud declarations as a way to say, I belong and I'm on the right side. And they stop talking with each other and they start performing for each other. And this is what we call identity signaling. It's not about an honest belief, right? It's about a careful position or a well thought out idea, right? It's not about these things. They don't grasp this concept. It is the emotional need to announce yourself, to plant a flag so loudly that no one can question which group you're in. And you see this everywhere right now. Long posts filled with intensity, hard lines drawn with no room for nuance, statements that sound more like slogans than thoughts. And so, what is happening underneath is kind of simple. If someone feels unsure of who they are or where they fit, declaring an identity gives them a temporary sense of certainty. So they are saying, hey, you know what? This is me. This is where I belong. This is the group I need to recognize, that needs to recognize me. And because the internet rewards intensity, the statements get louder to match the environment. And then we start to see it echoed. And then we see all this coddling and these chambers grow. So the problem is that this comes at the cost of the conversation. People stop being curious. They stop listening. They stop engaging in any way that invites them to understand. And instead, the goal becomes to show loyalty, to show alignment, and to prove that you are part of a particular side. And when the goal is to prove you belong, there is absolutely no room left to learn. And we see this in the applications of groupthink and inclusion until you're excluded. And kink spaces feel this harder than most. Many people come into these communities already feeling like an outsider in their regular lives. They may hide parts of themselves. They may feel misunderstood. They may have grown up without a place where they truly fit. So when they find kink, they find a room where they finally feel accepted. And that makes belonging feel precious. It makes it feel fragile. And when something feels fragile, people protect it fiercely, even if it means pushing others away. So when identity signaling shows up here, it can hit with a lot of force, and people treat their stances like a kind of armor. They defend their positions as if their place in the community depends on it. And that's why these declarations often sound harsher in our kink spaces. The underlying fear is stronger. The desire to belong is stronger. So the intensity gets amplified. This is also why you see people jump from a simple disagreement to a full-out attack. If someone feels their group identity is threatened, they react as if their safety is on the line, right? It's not about the idea being discussed, it's about what the idea represents. And once everything becomes symbolic, the actual conversation disappears. I've experienced this engaging with people a lot. And that becomes the problem. And it's going to constantly be the problem the more we see this showing up. Because when identity signaling becomes that whole normal, the room is going to lose its softness. People stop approaching each other with any type of patience. They start approaching each other with suspicion. They're ready to defend themselves instead of to connect. And eventually, the community loses one of the things that made it so valuable in the first place. It loses the ability to talk, to explore, and to disagree without turning on each other like a pack of jackals. This is the shift, and we're seeing it now. Not a shift in values, but a shift in how people present themselves. They're speaking to prove loyalty, not to learn, and they're speaking from fear, not curiosity. And if we don't recognize this pattern, it's going to start to reshape the entire space, more so than it's starting to do. And this is going to be the collapse of the conversation. So when identity signaling here becomes the norm, conversation is usually the first casualty. The middle ground disappears almost overnight. People who once felt comfortable asking questions or sharing concerns start to pull back because they sense that any uncertainty will be treated as disloyalty. And when uncertainty becomes dangerous, dialogue dies. And this is the point where I disagree turns into you're the enemy. It's not thoughtful. It's not grounded. It's an emotional shortcut that lets someone protect their position without actually defending it. And instead of engaging, they use names. They insult. They throw phobias at people. They call them racist or anything else. They push the other people into the opposite category because it feels safer than staying in the middle. And the middle takes work. It requires listening. It requires patience. And when people are already overwhelmed, they simply don't have that energy. And in kink spaces, older members feel this shift the most. They remember a time when people could exchange ideas without turning it into a loyalty test. They remember slow, patient conversations. They remember when curiosity was possible. And now those same people often feel like they have to hold their tongue just to avoid being targeted. And when the most thoughtful members of a community start going quiet, the tone of the entire space is going to change. And this is also where hostility sneaks in without resistance. When a community stops talking, it stops correcting, it stops questioning, it stops naming the things that need to be named. And that creates a vacuum. And into that vacuum, people pour rage, they pour intensity, and in some cases, they pour in prejudice. And I just recently saw this happen in real time. There was this post that appeared online and it crossed a very clear line. I want to be clear about this. It targeted an entire group, including Jewish people, with language that should have really raised a concern for a lot of people. Now, a few years ago, a post like this would have been challenged. People would have stepped in, they would have slowed the conversation down and said, "This is not who we are. This is not how we talk here." Instead, the post ran its course with almost no pushback. And that told me something, not about the person who wrote it, but about the climate that allowed it. It showed me that hostility has become so normal, so expected, that people no longer pause when they see something harmful. They scroll past it, they ignore it, they convince themselves it's not worth the effort. And that silence becomes an open door. And this is how conversation collapses. Not all at once, but through small moments when people choose not to speak, when they decide the backlash isn't worth it, when they feel their voice won't matter. And eventually, the only voices left in this room are the ones who speak in extremes. So when the discussion collapses like this, the community loses its ability to regulate itself. It loses the checks and balances that used to come from thoughtful members stepping in and guiding the tone. The space has become so reactive instead of reflective. People post to score points. They're not posting to connect. They argue to win, not to understand. And the saddest part is that most of this is completely avoidable. People are not losing the ability to talk because they no longer care. They're losing it because they're tired, they're overwhelmed, and they're afraid of the cost of being honest. And when a community reaches that point, hostility becomes the default language. And this is the heart of the problem. Not the individual posts, not the individual conflicts, it's the silence around them. It's the fear that keeps people from stepping into the middle. And once the middle disappears, the entire space tilts towards aggression. And this is where we're going to talk about hostility as a habit. Now, by the time hostility becomes the normal tone in our community, something deeper has already happened inside of that individual. Anger stops being a response and it starts becoming the pattern. And when anger turns into a pattern, people use it automatically. They are no longer reacting to a moment. They are repeating something that feels familiar and something that once gave them a sense of control. Now, our brains are built on efficiency. If a reaction works once or it seems to work, it gets stored. Now, when someone feels overwhelmed and they lash out, they often get a brief moment of release. Their body settles for a second, so they feel stronger, and that anxiety drops. And even if that relief is short lived, the brain remembers it. The next time they feel uneasy or threatened, their system reaches for the same reaction. Not because it's healthy and not because it solves anything, but because it's familiar. We see this in trauma patterns. We see this in other emotional dysregulated patterns. This is how anger becomes automatic. People stop thinking. They stop checking in with themselves. They stop asking, is this how I want to respond? The reaction fires before thought even arrives. And at that point, The anger is no longer connected to the actual situation. It's connected to the emotional memory of how it felt the last time they used it. And once something becomes automatic, people start defending it as if it were some sort of principle or ideology. And you can see this clearly online. Someone posts something extreme, not because they believe every word, but because that tone is the one they've practiced. It's become their default voice. They treat every disagreement like a threat. They treat every question as if someone's trying to undermine them. And when someone pushes back, they double down, not because their idea is solid, but because they feel exposed without the anger to protect them. And this stage here, hostility is not a stance, it's the armor. And people wear it to avoid feeling vulnerable. They use it to block discomfort or uncertainty or shame. And if someone challenges them, they hide behind intensity so they never have to admit confusion or doubt. This makes the anger feel purposeful. Even though the real purpose is to avoid being seen, it becomes a shield against feeling small. Kink communities often mistake this for their confidence, right? A loud post can look strong. A harsh tone can seem decisive, right? In reality, a lot of this behavior comes from people who feel deeply unsteady inside. They've learned that intensity keeps people at a distance, and it keeps them from having to slow down and face their own discomfort. It also keeps them from having to listen. Why? Because listening takes effort. It takes patience, it takes understanding. And when someone is running on emotional fumes, they avoid both. And the sad part is that many people who fall into this habit are not trying to create conflict. They're trying to protect themselves. They're tired, right? They feel overshadowed by the noise of the world. They feel unheard or unseen in other parts of their life. So when they get online, they reach for one tool that has reliably given them a sense of stability. They use anger the same way someone might use distraction or withdrawal. It's a way to cope with feelings they don't even know how to manage, right? But once hostility becomes the automatic, it stops being a coping tool and starts becoming part of someone's identity. And they mistake the reaction for conviction. They think that intensity proves they care or it shows strength. And in reality, it shows exhaustion. It shows fear. It shows ignorance. It shows someone who has forgotten how to feel grounded without creating distance. This habit does not stay confined to one person, and it spreads. And when enough people communicate this way, the tone of the whole community shifts. New members enter a space where hostility looks normal. So guess what? They adopt it too. And people who might, be thoughtful or, quiet, that they've learned to stay quiet so that way they're not seen because they don't want to be attacked. They don't want to ask questions because they're going to feel that, they're going to be under threat. And the people who rely on anger to get louder and, more certain, convinced that their intensity means they're right. And in the end, hostility is going to become the culture, not the reaction. And at that point, it takes deliberate effort to bring the community back to a place where people feel safe enough to speak without armor. And I don't know what's going to happen if it continues to go this way. But the shift is real. And I want to talk about now how this damages the kink community. Now, once hostility does become a habit and the tone of the community shifts, the real damage is going to begin. Kink has always been built on our curiosity, our desires, our erotic fantasies, trust, communication, and, like I said before, a real level of emotional maturity. Those are not optional. These are the foundation that keeps people safe and allows them to explore. So when anger becomes the dominant voice in the room, those foundations crack. And the first thing to disappear is going to be curiosity. People are going to stop asking questions because that feels risky. And if everything is treated like a loyalty test, no one wants to be the person who says, I don't understand, or can you explain that? Because in a hostile environment, Curiosity gets punished. It gets mistaken for ignorance or disrespect. And when people feel discouraged from asking, they begin to learn in silence. And silence is not where healthy kink culture grows. And definitely the next thing that's going to fall apart is trust, because trust takes time. It takes patience and steadiness and the sense that you can speak without being attacked. But in a space where hostility is normal, people don't feel secure enough to open up. They hold back. They hide parts of themselves that need understanding. They avoid posting or commenting or even reaching out. And even seasoned members start to retreat because they no longer feel the community can hold a real conversation without it turning on itself. This had a direct impact on exploration, and it will consistently and continually. Many people turn to kink spaces because they want guidance. They want to see how other people navigate similar experiences. But if the tone of the space tells them if you speak, you might be hit, with hostility, they're going to stop exploring. They're going to shut down. They will either pull away entirely or stay on the surface of their own, their interests. And in kink, staying on the surface is dangerous. It means people learn privately without any type of mentorship. And we're seeing that been growing for the last 10 years. It means they avoid asking the questions that matter most. It means they practice without the support they need. And as that hostility spreads, you also lose the emotional balance that kink requires. Healthy kink environments run on respect. People listen, they communicate clearly. They move at a pace that makes the room for feelings involved. But when anger becomes the standard tone, everything rushes. People snap at each other instead of slowing down. They debate in absolutes instead of nuance. And they go from zero to attack in seconds because that's what they see molded around them. Right? And when this becomes the normal, and it's heading that way, the core values of kink culture fade. Respect is going to get replaced with posturing. Communication gets replaced with declarations. Maturity is going to get replaced with emotional reactions that no one takes responsibility for. And if you don't believe me, look around. Look at your own kink spaces. Look globally what's happening. The community becomes reactive instead of reflective. And without reflection, there's no growth. This also affects new members. Someone discovering kink for the first time should be met with steady voices and thoughtful guidance. Instead, they may walk into a room where people are shouting, accusing, or trying to score points, and that tells them the community is unsafe. It tells them to keep their guard up. And once someone's guard up is in kink, they cannot learn the vulnerability required to navigate power exchange, or trust, or self-awareness. And the long-term cost is cultural erosion. A community feels different when people treat each other with patience and curiosity and respect. A kind of culture emerges when, hostility becomes the norm. The loudest people set the tone for everybody else. And the thoughtful people go quiet. And the culture starts to drift away from what made it worth being part, being part of it in the first place. I'm thinking back to all my times when I was with all these older people that were imparting their wisdom to me and how much I just sat and listened and absorbed. But if I was to walk into a room now where everybody's shouting, I'm not going to be inquisitive. I'm going to be quiet. So the damage here is not about these individual posts. It's not about one conflict or one moment. It's about the gradual loss of the qualities that make the kink community healthy. And when exploration dries up, when people stop trusting each other, and when the tone of the room becomes sharp and the community stops being a place for growth and becomes a place, for people to endure. And then it's no longer a community. It's just a wasteland. As I wrap all of this up here today, I want to bring this conversation back to something simple. Hostility in a community is not just noise. It's a sign. And it tells us something about where people are emotionally where they're at and what they feel they need to protect. And when anger becomes the first reaction, it usually means people have lost the room where they once felt safe enough to talk. Naming this pattern is not about taking a side or judging what anyone believes. It's about protecting the health of a shared space. When no one slows down to call out the shift, the loudest voices end up steering the culture. And once that happens, curiosity, respect, and trust start to fade. And those are the qualities that make kink work. Those are the qualities that let people explore without fear. And what I want you to take away from this episode is the understanding that tone matters as much as content. How we speak to each other sets the stage for what the community becomes. And when the conversation collapses, hostility grows in the cracks. And when people stay silent out of exhaustion or fear, the room loses the balance that once kept it steady. So, here's my question for you to sit with this week, as I always give you one. It's an important question. When you move through spaces online, do you add to the calm or to the noise? And how different would these communities feel if more people slowed down before reacting? That's where this work has to begin. That's where it's got to start, everyone. Not in pretending the hostility isn't there, I'm not saying that, but in choosing how you show up in the middle of it, right? This has been a big deal for me to do this one today because I don't want to get into politics. I don't care on what side. I don't care about your belief. I don't care about those things. I'm going to share a little bit about my life because I don't do that a lot because I don't like to, because this is always about the work. But the group that I'm with, my private life, where the people that I interact with privately, we are varied backgrounds, colors, creed, races, religions, right? We're quite varied. It's not about scoring points because none of us care about that. But when we walk through the door of the person who's hosting, none of that stuff comes with us. We're there for one reason, for the love of what we're doing, for being sadists or masochists or performance or watching. Because we see the people. And that's what we like. I'm not looking at your beliefs and judging you. I don't care about that. I care about being present and enjoying something. And to anybody who tries to strip that away, I won't associate with them and they won't associate with me. And that's fine, because there are a lot of people who need to hear what I've said today because they don't have the strength to say it. I don't bend a knee, and if this upsets people or people think I'm targeting a group or I've gone political, I haven't. Listen to the words I am saying because I am talking about behavior. And that's the important part. Now, I'm going to jump straight into You're Famous Now because today that was a little bit more direct for me. I saw some other heated things, some disappointments of. It was ironic. Before I decided to do the show this week on this subject, I've been getting lately, why am I not choosing a side? Why? Because my shows and my writings aren't about a political ideology or belief, and they're definitely not about a religion, right? So for Mayflower Margaret, who contacted me and asked me why I'm not getting into politics, and that somehow makes me some sort of, I don't know, I think she called me a cretin. I can't really understand, but my God, we're not in 1862. If you don't like me, you don't like me. That's fine. But let me explain something very clearly, because I know you listen to the show, Margaret. Here's the deal, because you've told me you listen. You told me how much you hate my show, that you listen every week to see what lies I'm spewing, which is kind of ironic. I don't really get that. That's a weird obsession. But for you, Margaret, for you, here's the deal. I don't pick a side because none of this is about that personal ideology, because this is about the work and this is about behaviors and this is about talking about how people feel and the interpretations around it, right? So you don't get to decide if I do. I don't care if you hate me. That's on you. If your life is consumed, you probably needed this episode more than anybody, right? Calling me names and telling me to go do things to myself. Well, you really need to listen to the show, right? Um, to the merchandise guy, I'm not partnering with you. I'm not interested, right? You getting mad and saying, because I don't want to carry your product or promote it, I have a right to choose who I want to work with. I just don't believe in what you're selling. I don't use it. I'm not asking you. I'm not even asking you for anything for free. I would happily buy something, but I don't see anything I want. What I found interesting is you then emailing my show looking for like a producer, and I produce my own show, and like saying I should be removed. Or do you have any idea that I actually do this show myself? No one pays me to do it. My practice supports this. I do this stuff for free, right? But guess what? Your stuff, I've looked at it, looks okay. I probably wouldn't use it because you don't sell stuff I use. That's fine. I don't know, man. Like, if you're going to get mad because people aren't buying your stuff or think you're like the best thing since, sliced bread, you're probably not going to have a really good business model. But no one owes you a connection. And I don't owe you anything, right? So I don't really understand that one. I'm sorry. I'm not going to carry your products here. And even if I was to ever partner with somebody like that, and I never have yet in 4 years, I would alert my audience, and then they would have to be open to inspecting it themselves and discussing it. And that's how, good capitalism works in a society, because they're going to review a product. You're selling a product, you're putting your capital into it, and the consumer buys it, and you're going to have to deal with those reactions. But I'm not going to lie for you. I don't do that. So I'm sorry, man. That's just, I told you that before, but you telling me you want me to fire myself. The letter was really not funny to me because you told me you want me to fire myself, right? To whom it may concern the Kink Perspective production team. Yeah, that's me, right? So I read it, and you're like, I didn't agree. I'd never agreed with you, so you lied. I was confused by all that one. That was funny, right? Um, to the 20 something, right? I can't remember if doesn't really matter. I'm just going to call you the 20 something. Okay, so I've heard this one before, that you all are waiting for us older guard people to go away because we're somehow ruining the kink community. Let me be clear. Let me be really clear. For those of us who have probably more than 10 years worth of experience, me, I'm topping 27 now, just entered my 27th year in this wonderful global community. Let me explain something to you. In your age group, and I've looked at the numbers because it's not hard, stats are really interesting. You all have more consent violations, problematic people, lies, discernment, theft, growing issues inside of your spaces than the people that are in my generation who've been doing this for a long time, who are now doing it private and keeping people like you out. Why do we have strict rules? Because rules are what kept us safe. You think rules are stupid. All right. Well, I tell you what. A new person with less than 6 months of experience shouldn't go into heavy scenes or heavy sessions with no idea, doesn't understand consent, right? But you think those rules are stupid. I tell you what, if you ever own a business, you ever own a dungeon, do me a favor, send me an email so I never ever visit that space, because I would not want to enter a walking hazard zone. That's what that is. Rules have kept what this community is. That's how we shape power exchange. It's not some fleeting concept, it's a reality. It's an exchange of power from the submissive to the dominant, and the dominant to the submissive. I'm sorry, you don't understand that concept. I'm kind of amazed that You said you're seeking power exchange. You don't even understand the concept of it. But yet it's my fault or my generation's fault. Something like that. I don't really know. But to that 20-something, good luck. You're going to need it because I don't think you're going to last long. You don't understand the tenements. You don't want to learn. You don't want to go to classes. You don't want to train. That's a walking red flag. You're dangerous. Straightforward. I go to classes and I train, or I'll talk to people, or I engage and I go to demos and I go and see workshops because that's how I keep growing my craft. You want to do none of that. That's a red flag. It's a dangerous person. But you do you. Anyway. Finally, we'll wrap up today's show. Yes, the rumors are true. Yeah, I'm working on a new concept right now for an upcoming book instead of Kink. No, I might reveal a title. I don't know yet. Second, real quick, upcoming shows. I've talked to Hi There Katsu. We got something on the books and something fantastic. I have just scored. I think it's going to be great. I can't wait to talk to her. A forensic psychologist is going to come on the show, and we're going to have a talk. I don't know about what yet. I'm waiting to see. I just got her email, so I haven't opened it because I want to do my show and finish it for today. Super excited about that. If not before the end of the year, definitely in the new year, I'm going to have a sit down with her, and that'll be exciting. Love having another, she's brilliant and does work, and she works in the trauma field. All of her stuff will be, of course, linked, right? So that's the upcoming stuff. And I'm only a couple shows away from my 200th show. I think I got in the next 2 weeks, I'll hit 200. I'm super excited about that. It's 4 years, 200 shows. I can't even believe it. 4 years of me talking to you all. Appreciate you all, though. Your questions keep this going. Your questions keep the community growing. Your curiosity is why you're here. And I respect that, and I want to keep that sacred, and I want to keep that protected. And that was the point of today's show. So let me know what you thought about today, what's going on in the bigger sense. Drop your stuff in the comments below. Let's talk. Reasonable dialogue, people. Reasonable, right? We're curious. No hostility, no pretenses. Until next time, everybody, be safe and stay kink.